Hi, everyone. Oh, and I see Ethan there. Hi, Ethan. I'm going to talk about your work today. Welcome to our spotlight talk today on Marjorie Content photographs. I'm Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at the Esherick Museum. We're going to hang on for like 30 seconds to make sure that everyone who is planning on joining us today is here. And then we'll get started. I'm going to share my screen. So glad that you guys could join us today. Okay, we're gonna get started. As with all of our spotlight talks, this is a sort of short 15 to 20 minute talk with about 5 minutes for questions at the end. We'll give an introduction to the photographer and Esherick patron, Marjorie Content, exploring their friendship and looking at some Content photographs, not only from public collections, because there is a lot out there, but specifically looking at some things that we have at the Esherick Museum. We're doing this today in part in celebration of daring design at the impact of 3 women on Wharton Esherick's craft. This is an exhibition currently on view at the Michener Museum of Art. It's on view there through February 6th and explores the sort of significant impact that 3 women, Helene Fisher, Hannah Weil, and Marjorie Content, had on Esherick's career, artistic development. These were people who were collaborators, patrons, folks who really shaped Esherick's thinking and what he was able to make and produce. So we're super thrilled to be collaborating with them. I've just realized that I've neglected to ask you to put yourselves on mute if you are not already, so I'll drop that in right now. And I should mention that I have my colleague Katie Wynn standing by. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We will either get to them after the program or Katie can try to address them while we're chatting today. I wanted to show some installation shots of daring design. You can see it's a fantastic mix here of works on paper, of Esherick work. Some of the Michener's own social media focusing here, I liked on this floor-to-ceiling dressing table designed by Esherick for Marjorie Content in 1932, because we'll be looking at Content's own photograph of that later in the talk today. I want to mention before we get started some other programs focused on this exhibition and these ideas that WEM is a part of. If you're intrigued by the stories we share today, there are many chances to take a deeper dive, including our curator conversation on daring design with Laura Igo. She's one of the co-curators of the Michener exhibition, along with Mark Spheri. That's October 14th at 3. Spotlight talks on the 2 other women in the exhibition, including Hannah Weil. That's the next one coming up, and I'm showing an image that Esherick made in relationship to his time with her on the bottom left. And then a panel I'll be moderating at the Michener Museum in collaboration with the show on women in craft. We'll be talking with Mira Nakashima, Jennifer Nava-Milliken from the Center for Art and Wood, and Miriam Carpenter. So without further ado, let's get started looking at Marjorie Content. She was a photographer sort of deeply connected to the New York avant-garde scene of the 1920s and 1930s. Born in 1895, the daughter of a wealthy New York City stockbroker. She had been a childhood friend of Flora Stieglitz-Strauss, Alfred Stieglitz's niece, and was in that sort of social circle. And I'm showing here an early photograph she made around 1927 of Alfred Stieglitz's home in Lake George, New York. Content's first husband, Harry Loeb, was a Guggenheim heir, and he founded the journal Broom, which published Sherwood Anderson, E.E. Cummings, Gertrude Stein, William Carlos Williams, and Virginia Woolf. So if you're familiar with Esherick's own narrative, you may already be starting to see some ties here, especially to the connection between visual artists and writers, and specifically some of the same writers, including Sherwood Anderson. We'll circle back to that as well. In the 1920s, Content joined the staff of the Sunwise Turn, which is a bookstore and literary salon founded and run by women and frequented by people like Robert Frost and Peggy Guggenheim, who I learned was an intern there in 1920. It's funny to think of Peggy Guggenheim being an intern anywhere, but this is a perfect place for her to be. So how did Content and Esherick connect? They first met in 1926 while visiting, Esherick was visiting Henry Varnum Poor, the ceramist and painter in New City, New York, where Content lived with her second husband, the painter and set designer Michael Carr. This is also the year 1926 that she sort of first became serious about photography. Carr and Content were building a house in New City. Content was taking photographs of the house. It really sparked something there for her. Carr passed away in 1927, and Content returned to New York City and took lots of images that have a sort of special interest in geometry and shapes in the urban landscape. So you're seeing here these two photographs where she has really looked at sort of the urban milieu, the sort of industrial context here, and is looking for pattern, for light, for dark, for shadow. She's interested in that kind of abstract look. She also focused quite a bit on landscapes, flowers in bloom, and sort of things emerging from these dark shadows. They were often really tightly cropped. So I love on the left, you have this image of a flower that really takes you almost inside it and captures the light coming up through the petals. And then her cloud study on the other side, where we're really getting this atmospheric sense without any bigger sense of context for the landscape. It was through her connection to Stieglitz that Content became a really close friend of Georgia O'Keeffe. And I love these images next to each other, both of their versions of sort of calla lilies from the same year. Content's photograph on the left and O'Keeffe's image on the right. Content was such a close friend to O'Keeffe that she actually nurtured her through depression in the 1930s. They spent time in Bermuda together in 1933, when O'Keeffe was sort of convalescing. And I just wanted to show, I love these two comparative images too. These banana blossoms, we don't think of O'Keeffe doing these kinds of tropical flowers nearly as much as sort of flowers from other regions. But you've got here Content's approach to the sort of capturing that idea on the left, and then O'Keeffe's drawing, beautiful drawing on the right. In the summers of 1931, 1932, 1933, Content traveled to the American Southwest, to New Mexico, where O'Keeffe had started traveling in 1929. She went to Arizona to photograph the landscape and native communities there. She played more with sort of composition and a more pictorial style, right? We're getting more of a sense of the actual landscape here than in those really tight, closely cropped abstract shots, although we're really still focusing on light and shadow, these kind of formal elements of photographic composition. Maybe that's something that's a little more distinct is a picture like this. From the early 1930s, Content was also commissioned by the Department of the Interior to photograph Native American life in the American Southwest. And this sort of lovely, evocative portrait of a father and a son, which I think will be really beautifully compared when we look at some of her images of Esherick and his son Peter a little later on in the talk today. After leaving New York City on her sort of trips out west, Content and her family would stop in Paoli to stay with the Eshericks. She brought Esherick's baskets, which are displayed in the studio. So even for those of you who have been to the studio many times, you might have missed things like these wonderful woven Navajo baskets that are a part of Esherick's aesthetic milieu, seemingly unassuming, but they have contained within them stories of his relationships with artists like Content. She wrote about the sort of experience of heading from the East Coast to the Southwest, saying, I always stopped at Wharton's. We never seemed to think that we were on the road until we took off from Paoli. So it was very much a sort of departure point. And I love this image that she captured of Wharton Esherick's, of the studio in those early days, the reflection of the trees here in the windows. I also think this is really interesting to look at in relationship to this much earlier image, or not much earlier, several years earlier image of the sort of rural cabin at Alfred Stieglitz's, where you get things with a little more clarity, a little more crispness. You can tell how her eye as a photographer has shifted between these two images. I also love a sort of early image from the early 1930s that she took of Esherick's sculpture Oblivion in particular. So while it's in the process of being created in the studio, I think about Content's connections to theater, since this is a sculpture that represents actors embracing in a scene from The Son of Perdition, which was mounted at the Hedgerow Theater, where Esherick was heavily involved. I also think Esherick's interest in sort of these sensuous and fluid lines we see in so much of Content's floral photography. And I like to think that these sort of modes of aesthetic sensibility might have been part of what brought them together and made them sort of so simpatico. This is also, these visits is part of what brought them together to work on Esherick's famous bedroom suite for Content, which is a part of the show at the Michener. This was commissioned in the early 1930s for Content's New York City brownstone, where she had relocated after the end of her third marriage. It allowed Esherick to continue experimenting with expressionistic design shortly after his travels in Germany and beginnings of experimentation with that kind of geometric thinking. Esherick called the bed, which you can see part of on the left, one of the biggest and most complete things I have ever done. So these are Content's images of the finished pieces in her apartment. I love Laura Igo, and I heavily encourage you to get the catalog for this exhibition. Laura Igo makes a wonderful connection in her essay on Marjorie Content to the sort of stepped nature of the shelving here and the stepped nature of all of those Southwest images that Content was taking. So now I can't unsee that. One of the pieces that we've actually loaned to the show, and we've loaned a number of things to the show at the Michener, are these documents. Here we know from correspondence that she was involved in the design process. In this letter, she wrote specifically about the dressing table that we've just looked at. You can sort of see the drawing of it here, sketching it out with detailed dimensions. The letter talks about the model that they were working on together. It makes recommendations about the height of the piece, which suggests that maybe they may have worked with a full-size maquette. She also shares her ideas in here about the rest of the bedroom, thinking about white walls, although she asks Esherick if plum would be a good option, dark wood trim, and additional Paduc furniture. Content met Jean Toomer in 1934, who would become her fourth husband. She met him through O'Keeffe. He's a poet and novelist associated with the Harlem Renaissance and best known for his 1923 novel, Cain. They married and moved to Doylestown, Pennsylvania in 1935, which is the same year that Esherick started commissions at the Bach House. So I think you can see how this kind of creative friendship and having some of these major commissions, like what Esherick did for Content, really allowed him to step into some of these sort of holistic, large-scale commissions, like what he did for Curtis Bach. Esherick helped Content and Toomer convert a bank barn into their home, Mill House. That might sound familiar to folks here, because we know, of course, that Esherick was thinking about Pennsylvania bank barns in the architecture of the studio. Toomer established a publishing house, began to produce pamphlets for which Esherick created woodcut covers. He also designed Esherick designed additional furniture for Content and Toomer, including built-in bookshelves, serving trays, a ladle, a hammer-handled chair they acquired for the house. Content also commissioned a dining room table from Esherick for Toomer in 1935. Much of this is a part of the exhibition at the Michener, which is why I'm not showing it to you today here. I hope you will go and see it. We can see here this lovely, sensitive portrait of that Marjorie Content took of her husband, Gene Toomer, or soon-to-be husband, Gene Toomer. Some of the portrait shots really give such a complex sense of personality. I think you can see that in this image. Content built a dark room at Mill House. She was photographing family and friends, including Esherick and Peter. I love this image here, portrait she has taken of Esherick. He gave this in a handmade frame to Sherwood Anderson to hang in his Rogues Gallery at Ripon, his home in Virginia. Marjorie Content knew Anderson from her days at the Sunwise Turn, where the shop's gallery had exhibited a painting that Anderson made under Esherick's tutelage in Fairhope, Alabama. So you can see the networks just twist and turn all around each other. This image that we've used to sort of illustrate the talk, I think, is so beautiful and evocative. This is Peter on the horse, Jeter, made for the Hedgerow Theater. Esherick, Content photographed Peter a number of times over the course of his childhood. I'm showing here these wonderful photos of Peter Esherick and then Wharton with Peter. Content took. You get this sort of beautiful capturing of personality and sensibility, and then the relationship between father and son. I love these moments of sort of thinking together and their body language where they're turned towards each other, or Peter sort of shifting body language over the different images that Content has taken of him. It's interesting to also note that, and this is where I'll shout out the work of Ethan, who was with the museum until very recently and departed back to grad school, but has done a marvelous blog post for us that looks at, among other resources, Talks with Peter, which is an unpublished manuscript by Toomer documenting Peter Esherick's relationship with Toomer and Content and sort of philosophical conversations captured over the course of one summer. That's at the Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library in July and August of 1937. When Peter was 11, rather than go to camp, he was sent to stay with Marjorie and Jean. So those conversations were done with Jean. Marjorie recorded them in shorthand. And so there was this depth of connection in terms of not just sort of spending time together, but also capturing these philosophical conversations. And I do think you can see the depth of that in the images that she's taking here. Content stepped back from photography and into other pursuits, including her husband's work, her progressively deepening involvement with the Society of Friends, and wood carving and woodworking in her own right. And you can, it's hard to imagine that that would not have come about without her friendship with Esherick. They remained longtime friends. She wrote to him in 1964 when he was in the hospital, and I'm quoting here, "Even though I don't see you often, I think of you a lot against the background of your own home and workshop. That's where you belong." And I think in this lovely portrait from 1952, you get that sense of Esherick in place where he is supposed to be. There's a sort of fittedness to this image. Content passed away in 1984. There's so much more of her life that's explored and on view as a part of the exhibition at the Michener. And I hope that you will take the time to go and see it and to spend some time with the other partnered programs that we've worked on together. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we'll open it up for questions. And I'll ask folks if they have questions to feel free to just unmute themselves and speak up, or you're welcome to put them in the chat.
Hi, it's Lisa Richardson. I have two clarifying questions about things you said.
Sure.
One is when you were showing the letter that she wrote to
Mhm.
Wharton about the vanity, that you didn't call it that, but that's the only word I can
Mhm.
think of. You said a full-size maquette. I didn't know what that meant.
A maquette, so a model is a
Oh.
maquette's another word for a model.
Oh, okay. And then just toward the end here, when you were showing the 1952 picture of Wharton, you used the phrase Society of Friends about content, but you don't mean Quakers. You just
I do indeed mean Quakers.
So Content was a Quaker, or became more involved with
She
Quakers?
became involved with them during her time in Pennsylvania. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, if we have no other questions, I'll thank everyone here for joining me today and for spending some time delving into a little bit into the life of this incredibly fascinating woman, and a real reciprocal relationship with Esherick. I think you can see through even just the little bit that we've shared today. We'll share some more resources in a follow-up email, and I hope that you will take the chance to go to the Michener and then maybe come back to the studio and look at some of the things on view in our space in a new way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.